Okay, I think we'll get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESG-CV. My name is LaQuantia Goodman, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for public record. Office hours recordings are on the HCD ESG webpage under Technical Assistance and Training. A copy of the slide deck and recording will also be available to you by your grant administrator or annual representative. Next slide. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered in the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Alongside our presenters, we also have several HCD staff, including ESG representatives, ESG-CV grant administrators, and other consultants who are able to answer questions during the question and answer session. Next slide. Our agenda for today includes ESG and ESG-CV updates, office hours updates, upcoming trainings, ESG and the ESG-CV question and answer, and our Spotlight Series presentation, a monitoring refresher. Next slide. Although we don't have any other ESG updates today, please note slide 4 and next slide, Taylor. Slide 5 will be included in the slides for today for your convenience. Please use this information as needed to contact your ESG representative when needed. Next slide. ESG-CV reminders and updates. HCD is now amending ESG-CV contracts to extend the contract expiration date to 12/31/23. ESG-CV contract amendments are currently being routed. Be on the lookout for your pending amendment to arrive via email. The authorized signer must sign the standard 213. Email it back to HCD's contracts office as soon as possible. And please contact your GA if you have any questions. Next slide. The new term of agreement and performance milestones are as follows. This agreement will expire on December 31st, 2023. All program funds for projects, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, shall be expended by September 30th, 2023. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. And all final funds requests shall be submitted to the department by November 15th, 2023. Next slide. The new expenditure milestone requirements. In accordance with HUD's expenditure deadlines included in the CPD 2206 ESG-CV notice, grantees must meet the following expenditure deadlines for ESG-CV funding. Should the grantee not meet the following expenditure requirements, HCD reserves the right to recapture any unspent ESG-CV awarded funds up to the maximum amount listed below. 75% of the award should be expended by January 31st, 2023. The maximum recapture, it will be the difference between 75% of the total award and the amount drawn in IDIS as of January 31st, 2023. Next slide. Once you have received your executed amendment, you can submit an RFF through eCivis. Please note, this round of extension amendments does not include tribal grantees. Tribal grantee agreements will be addressed later. Next slide. HCD upcoming office hours are listed here. Please, for all requests, send all requests to HCD for certifications of consistency with consolidated plan should be sent to Alexis Navarro. The training website is listed here as well and will be put into the chat box. And for any of our previous office hours recordings, please see that link below or the links below as well. Next slide. You may access these websites for upcoming trainings and the below website for any past trainings also. Next slide. This slide contains COVID response resources, so please feel free to access those at any time that you may need to. Next slide. And this slide contains our monkeypox resources, so please utilize those as needed as well. Next slide. This slide contains a list of our ESG resource links and will also be available in the slide deck. Next slide is fine, Taylor. Do we have any questions at this time? Okay. It seems as though we don't have any questions, so now we'll turn our attention to Erin as she reviews the subcontractor responsibilities around collecting reimbursement, documentation, documented eligibility and policies and procedures that every agency needs to have in place. Here's your monitoring refresher by Erin.
Thanks, Taylor. Thank you, Taylor. So hi, everyone. My name is Erin Rutherford, and I'm a grant administrator for the HCD ESG-CV program. Today, I'm going to be talking about HCD's monitoring of their ESG subrecipients. Taylor, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is our agenda for my presentation. We're going to cover an update on HCD's progress with monitoring, talk about the impact of the projects that we've monitored thus far. I'm going to do an overview of themes from the monitoring review that we've done so far, and then we'll have time for question and answers, and I'll review some resources that you might find kind of helpful for monitoring. Next slide, Taylor. Thank you. So now I'm going to discuss some of the progress that HCD has made for their subrecipient monitoring. So far, 11 subrecipients are currently being monitored, and that includes an additional 3 subrecipients that were selected to be monitored during HCD's HUD monitoring that they had back in July. HCD is going to continue to monitor the remaining ESG-CV subrecipients up through summer of 2023. And just as a reminder for the terms that I'll be using today, the subrecipient is the entity, such as the county or the nonprofit organization, that receives the funding directly from California HCD. Sometimes these entities are referred to as the grantee, and then the subrecipients are the providers that the subrecipient funds to carry out the ESG-CV activities. And just to keep in mind that it's the subrecipient's responsibility to also monitor their own subrecipients. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now I'm going to review a little bit of the impact that the 11 subrecipients have done that are currently being monitored. So through this review, we have seen 75 unique programs that are providing street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention services. Through these programs, a total of 8,184 households have been served. And additionally, a total of $1,640,000 were used for hotel costs that kept participants safe during the COVID pandemic. We have seen a lot of positive impacts for communities throughout this review and are definitely looking forward to more impact as we monitor more communities. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the themes that we have found through this review. These next few slides that I'm going to go over are meant to serve as reminders for things that ESG-CV subrecipients should have in place in order to receive these funds. I definitely encourage you to share this information with your staff so that you can be as prepared as possible for a future monitoring review. And also, if you've monitored your sub-recipients, then please feel free to type in the chat as I go along some common themes or issues that you might have identified also. So our first theme is policies. As a reminder, subrecipients must have ESG-specific internal policies and procedures. And please note that this is not the same thing as having ESG written standards. Written standards usually come with specific requirements, and that might be more of a community-wide document as opposed to the county or the nonprofit's internal policies and procedures. In addition to ESG-specific PMPs, ESG-CV subrecipients also have to have financial policies in place that includes procurement procedures, and within that also has to contain conflict of interest policies. And then lastly, as part of ESG-CV, there has to be a duplication of benefits policy in place. HCD has developed their own duplication of benefits policy that has been emailed to the subrecipients in the past. And it's also required that you follow HCD's own duplication of benefits policies. If you need a copy of that, their sample policy or the sample duplication of benefits analysis, then please reach out to your grant administrator because we can email that to you. Next slide. Thank you. So the next theme that I'm going to go over is record keeping. One of the primary record keeping requirements is around participant eligibility. A subrecipient must have intake policies and procedures around obtaining evidence of and documenting the participant eligibility. These procedures have to establish the order of obtaining evidence, such as third-party documentation first, intake worker observations second, and then certification from the person seeking assistance as third. Subrecipients must also have policies for how they monitor their own subrecipients. In addition to that monitoring policy, there needs to be evidence or documentation that you are doing the subrecipient monitoring. An example of that evidence would be copies of your monitoring notice letters to your subs, perhaps a monitoring summary report, a corrective action plan. And if you haven't started monitoring yet, then at the minimum, you will at least need to provide your monitoring plan when we request the documents for review. Lastly, if subrecipients must maintain adequate documentation for all of their costs and expenses, and that includes invoices and receipts and proof of payment, there are available financial documentation resources and guides that were previously sent out by your grant administrator. So please reach out to them if you would like copies of those. I know that there's changes in staff, so there might be some turnover where they didn't get these extra resources. We're happy to send them back out to you. And when you get your monitoring notice, we'll also provide these guides to you as well. Next slide. So next I'm going to cover some of the project-specific themes. So starting with street outreach. Street outreach projects can serve people that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and there must be verification of that unsheltered homeless status for the participants that you're serving. One way to document this would be through the HMIS data element for current living situation. If that data element is filled out in HMIS and it lists an unsheltered location, that will suffice as verification of homeless status for street outreach participants. And additionally, the services provided to those participants must be documented. That could be documented in HMIS or in the progress notes of a participant's file if they have one. Next slide, please. On to emergency shelter. So this is similar to street outreach themes in that there must be a verification of homelessness for the participants served. Self-certification is an acceptable form of verification documentation. So for example, if you are running a night-by-night shelter, that could be in the form of having a sign-in sheet that has a statement certifying that those entering the shelter are experiencing homelessness. Additionally, services also have to be documented that are being provided to the participants in the shelter. And as I stated on the previous slide, this could be documented in HMIS or in the progress notes of the participant's file. Next slide, please. All right, now we're moving on to homeless prevention. The primary theme for homeless prevention that we found is around eligibility. So this slide lists the different types of housing statuses that a participant has to meet in order to be eligible for homelessness prevention services. This includes category 2, 3, and 4 of HUD's homeless definition, or the at-risk of homelessness definition. The HUD Exchange has some great resources regarding homeless prevention eligibility and how to document that eligibility, which I'll share on our resource slide at the end. And then additionally, for homeless prevention, there has to be an income evaluation that takes place. So the participant file needs to include an income evaluation form and documentation of that income. And this income evaluation form and documentation is required both at the initial intake when they enter the program and at the time of participant eligibility reevaluation, which for ESG-CV programs is required at least every 6 months. Next slide, please. All right, now for rapid rehousing. So similar to the other activity types that I've covered, there has to be documentation of eligibility for rapid rehousing participants. Rapid rehousing eligibility includes category 1, the literally homeless definition, and category 4 for fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. Please keep in mind, though, that if a participant falls under category 4, they also must meet the eligibility requirements in category 1. So an example of an ineligible rapid rehousing participant would be if that participant is housed, has a pay or quit notice, and is trying to stay in their current unit. That would be an example of someone that is not eligible for rapid rehousing. And then also remember that there's various methods of documentation for rapid rehousing eligibility that can include third party, the intake worker observation, and self-certification form from the person seeking assistance. The files also need to document the services provided. And in addition to the case management services, this includes any financial assistance that you're providing. So security deposits, rental assistance, utility payments, there's a variety of different types of assistance you can provide, and the file will need to have that documentation showing that proof of payment. Rapid rehousing also requires a reevaluation of participant eligibility if that participant is enrolled for at least 1 year. So similar to homeless prevention, that would include an income evaluation form and the documentation of income. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to review some rental assistance themes. So this applies anytime that your program is providing rental assistance to a landlord or an owner. If you're providing rental assistance, the participant file has to include this checklist of things. So that includes the rental assistance agreement between the agency and the landlord. And please make a note that the rental assistance agreement is a different document from the lease that typically is between the participant and the landlord or owner. There also needs to be a habitability standards inspection form showing that the unit passed habitability standards. There has to be a rent reasonable calculation. There also needs to be the VAWA notice of occupancy rights and the VAWA lease addendum. And then lastly, if the unit was built before 1978, there has to be a lead-based paint visual assessment, evidence of the lead-based paint disclosure, and evidence that the participant was provided with that pamphlet about protecting your family from lead in home. And lastly, there also has to be a duplication of benefits analysis. HUD has samples of all of these forms online, but again, please reach out to your grant administrator if you would like a sample copy of those forms. Next slide. Okay, so the last theme that I'm going to review today is in regards to allowable costs. A one-time payment for rental arrears for rapid rehousing participants is allowable, but only if that payment is necessary for an eligible participant to move into new housing. So if there was a participant who is housed behind on arrears and wants to stay in that housing, paying those arrears is not an allowable cost, in addition to what I already mentioned, that that participant would not meet rapid rehousing eligibility in the first place. Regarding utility arrears, you can only pay up to 6 months of arrears, and you have to show that that payment did not exceed 6 months. So in order to do that, you would need a breakdown of the charges month by month from the utility company, and that would demonstrate that no more than 6 months of utilities was paid. And please note that a breakdown of charges by month is different than a month-by-month usage chart that doesn't include the charges. I have seen some utility bills that will show you how much use they had month by month over the last year, but it doesn't include what those monthly charges actually were. So make sure that you have something from the utility company that breaks down how many months that total balance includes. Next slide. So before we move on to our question and answer discussion, I want to share with you some resources that might be helpful for you and or your sub-recipients. HCD recently hosted a community workshop on monitoring and eligibility documentation. I highly recommend that you view that presentation and share it with your sub-subs. The link to the recording is right there on this slide. There's also a couple of HUD exchange resources around the categories of homelessness and the ESG income limitations. And then lastly, I encourage you to check out HCD's ESG webpage for a list of all of their policies. And thanks to Sarah Theobald, we'll be getting a little insight every other week on what those policies are on HCD's website. Next slide, Taylor. Okay, and now we are at our Q&A portion, our discussion. Are there any questions that folks have? Any comments? Or if you want to type in the chat box common themes or issues that you've identified, we have the next 30 minutes or so to discuss that. I don't think I saw any questions in the chat yet. Sure, Ava, we can definitely do that. If you want to give me just a second.
And Erin, we do have a question in our office hours chat. That's from Melanie Wilson.
Okay.
And you want me to read it?
Yeah, if you don't mind reading it, that would be great.
Okay. It says, do we know when the reallocated amounts will be announced?
Okay, and I believe that Heather might have answered that in the chat already. And so her response to that was that HCD leadership is determining priorities for the reallocated ESG-CV funds. So unfortunately, we don't have a timeline yet for that decision and announcement, but we will keep you posted as soon as we have new information to provide. I'm going to get those links real quick for the chat. So I'll wait and see if any other questions come in while I'm doing that. All right, so the first link I'm putting in the chat is our link to the office hours, or not office hours, sorry, the community workshop presentation on monitoring. And then I'm going to drop the HUD exchange resources around the categories of homelessness and the income limits. And then lastly, here is the link for HCD's website, where you can find all of the policies that they've created so far.
Hi, Erin. I have a very quick question.
Yeah.
I may have overheard this wrong. Earlier, you showed a slide where you listed the rental assistance schemes, and one of those documents was the rental assistance agreement in the participant file. And I believe you mentioned that that's different from the lease, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Could you provide an example? What, just kind of like a brief example, what the rental assistance agreement kind of looks like, or what does it contain?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I will actually, if you give me just a second, I can drop the ESG regulation around rental assistance agreements. But the kind of primary difference to think about that is the rental assistance agreement is typically a document that is between the landlord and the agency or the program itself. And it kind of outlines the parameters around, how payments work, what types of communications take place. Just a second. Let's see. All right, here is the link to the regulation for rental assistance agreement. So it basically sets forth the terms of the rental assistance that's going to be provided. It also tells or outlines for the owner having to give notice to the participant if they have to vacate, if any eviction action takes place. And the lease is typically the document that is between the participant or the tenant and the landlord or owner. So I think everyone is pretty familiar with what a lease is, that contract that's between the tenant and the landlord, whereas the rental assistance agreement is more of a contract between the agency providing the rental assistance and the
owner. Got it. Thank you.
Anne asked a question, does the landlord rental assistance agreement terms have to match the lease terms? That is a good question. So the rental assistance agreement with the owner has to state that the program participant moves out of housing, or sorry, I'm reading that incorrectly. I'll copy this into the chat so that you're aware, but we can definitely give you an example of that rental assistance agreement, and we'll send that out with our office hours follow-up materials so that you all have an example of that. I can actually include examples of all of the forms that we covered today.
Erin, we're going to put an example in the chat that we can also email out.
Awesome. Micah, you asked about the duplication of benefits form. I can show you what that looks like if you give me just a second. And we can, again, email this out to everyone in our follow-up. So Taylor, I'm going to take over screen sharing from you. Okay, so this is an example of the duplication of benefits checklist. This is one of the forms that HCD has released, and like I said, we will email this to you all. But it lists, the program participant that you're working with, and then ask different questions about whether or not they've applied for other types of financial assistance or other types of rental assistance. So if they haven't, then you'll just check off that box and move on to the next question. But if they have, then you'll answer this next series of questions. So you're looking at whether or not they were denied assistance, whether or not they have applied for assistance and haven't received any, approval or disapproval from that. And then also whether or not they've actually applied for and received that rental assistance. And then there's a place for the case manager to fill out their information and basically certify that, they have made this duplication of benefits determination. And like I said, we will definitely email this out afterwards. Does that help, Micah? I don't see anything else from Micah. So the duplication of benefits instructions and forms, I believe I'd have to go back and look at my email, but I think they were sent in November or December of 2021. So this is not a new request. It is something that HCD, has had a policy on the books for a few months now. And duplication of benefits was also listed in the ESG-CV notices. So I would recommend that you go back and review that as well. I know the July 2021 notice had some language around that as well. Any other questions?
Erin, there is one that came directly to me, and I'm gonna ask it and answer it simply because someone else may have the same question.
Okay.
And that question was, when they clicked on the CPD notice, it didn't mention the 75% expenditure date of January 31st. And it doesn't mention that because that is an HCD deadline. HCD has given that deadline to us and not HUD.
And for those that have been around since the beginning of this, you remember that HCD had previously set separate spending deadlines that were a little different from HUD. So definitely check your most recently executed contract amendments for that language. Micah, I saw your question that you're doing your duplication of benefits checks a little differently. Because I don't know what your current method is, I would say if you can email your duplication of benefits policy to your grant administrator, then we could take a look over it and provide some additional feedback. Any other questions? Comments? Deidre, about the updated RFF info that was just sent out. So the only change to the RFF that that was sent out yesterday is that the template now has a revised contract expiration date. So nothing else in this RFF version has changed since the last update we had, which was about 6 months ago. I think we revised the RFF to change the way that you report indirect costs. So for this round, the only change was that your expiration date is now December 31st of 2023, as opposed to the end of this month. And that was reflected in the RFF workflow also. So just one slight change. Micah, for your question, yes, I would just hold off since you are, thank you for reminding me, I forgot that you all are also currently being monitored. So any, feedback that we have about that will be provided through your monitoring review. So yes, just hold tight for now on that. Any other questions on monitoring? Well, as I said earlier, we will put together all the forms that I mentioned, and I'll have LaQuantia send that in her follow-up email. So if you just want to give me about a day or so to get those forms together, we'll be able to email those out to you. Thanks, Tuesday. Well, if there's no other questions, I think we can end a little bit earlier today. As I said, please, email your grant administrator anytime that you have questions. We definitely, want to help you get prepared for monitoring so that you can have the best review as possible. So we're here to support you in any way that we can. So please reach out anytime that you need. I hope you all have a good week. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.